welcome to Talking Bottom. I'm Angela Pearson.
And I'm Paul Tanton, not Matt Brooks.
Matt is not here with us today, but Paul and I are delighted to be joined on the podcast by a very special guest this week. He's a prolific comedy writer, stand-up comedian, novelist, Perrier Award nominee, founder member of the Comedy Store Players, and the man who, according to Wikipedia, so we'll have to check our sources, the man who coined the phrase, comedy is the new rock and roll. For over 35 years, he's written for some of the most successful shows on TV, including Spitting Image, The Rory Bremner Show, The 11 O'Clock Show, My Family, and Not Going Out, and on radio for Dead Ringers, The News Quiz, and Sunday Format. He co-created the award-winning 15-minute musical and has written over 100 songs for the multi-BAFTA award-winning BBC hit Horrible Histories. He co-hosted the podcast sitcom Geeks with James Carey from 2015 to 2023. He's a script editor. He spends much of his time teaching comedy writing to everyone from beginners to hit sitcom writers, and he has written a plethora of books to help comedy writers. He's also penned novels about the stand-up Barry Goldman, the third book in the trilogy is out in January 2026. I think it's safe to say that this man knows about comedy. And on top of all this, the particular reason he joins us today, he was lucky enough to be alive and to get a ticket to see Rik and Ade's 1979 Edinburgh Fringe show Death on the Toilet. Dave Cohen, thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you talking bottom with us today.
Well, thanks. I mean, after that intro, I sort of feel like saying, and good night. Thanks. I am actually 94, which explains why. Over time, that's not that many things. Yeah.
Even if you were that age, Dave, it sounds like that's a hell of a lot of work to pack into a career, and you're still not done yet.
I hope not. No, I'm still very much. I just love writing, and I love working with new writers as well. So that's pretty lucky, really. And I've been lucky enough to do what I love for a living. So it's pretty brilliant, really.
Absolutely, but you've plugged away at it, Dave, and you are excellent at helping lots of up and coming writers. I've done a couple of your courses, and they're fantastic. Anyone who's thinking about it, you should, and sign up to Dave's newsletters as well. They're fantastic. But Dave, you started out your career as a comic folk singer before becoming a stand-up in the 80s. Is that right?
Yeah, yes. I mean, I think punk basically changed everything. So 1977, 76, and Rik was the same. Rik was about 6 months older than me. I think his birthday was March, and I was September. So we're kind of from that era. I started out on the kind of the folk club scene, and that was in those days. That was where the most original comedy was, because the most of the comedy that we grew up with, and I'm sort of similar age to Rik, was that kind of 70s mother-in-law jokes and jokes, racism and stuff. I mean, it was just nobody thought that it was all shocking or anything. Just that was how it was. But on the folk scene, you had people like Jasper Carrott and Billy Connolly. That was kind of where I began. And then punk happened, and it blew all of that away. And you got these people coming through like John Cooper Clarke and John Dower. I went from performing folk clubs to performing punk gigs, which was, as you can imagine, going from 40 middle-aged men with Aran sweaters and singing into their beards about their maidenheads and things. They're suddenly appearing in front of 2,000 punks at the Bristol Locarno, supporting a band called the Cortinas, and they were a fantastic audience. Sorry.
I was going to ask. So, what sort of prompted the move from sort of folk comedy into actual stand up itself? What sort of spurred that move?
Well, again, I think we were all making it up as we went along. So I went to the Edinburgh Fringe in 1979. I was with a student group, and the year before I'd done a thing called a one man rock opera. Basically, it was a sort of spoof of Tommy. It was just me with my acoustic guitar, and it was shambolic all over the place. But so the next year I went up with a surrealist theatre group, and again it is very much the spirit of punk. And I can't remember how I met Rik, I think, but I think somebody, he was going out with someone in the group who was in our theatre, and we just met in the pub and we just hit it off really. And he said, come and see our show. So I went and saw this show. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, on a wet afternoon, in a converted porn cinema in Edinburgh, and there's about, I don't know, 20 people in there, and it was called Death on the Toilet, the show. And this was quite a sick joke of the time, because 2 years earlier Elvis Presley had died on the toilet. So it was quite, and again, you wouldn't bat an eyelid now if you can see shows called "Oh Fuck This" or whatever, why I no longer give a fuck about whatever. But Death on the Toilet was, and it wasn't obvious. You see it sounded like almost like a sort of Agatha Christie thing, but then you go, oh, haha, it's toilets. It's not Death on the Nile. It's Death on the Toilet. Haha. And then it's, oh, bloody hell, it's Elvis Presley.
Amazing.
And I think Rik, I'm sure Ade
and what
had something to do with
can
that
you
as
remember was there a plot, Dave, that you could remember? What was the overall gist? Because we are fascinated to hear about this show.
I'm sorry not to be more kind of detailed about it, but what I remember the most was I just spent most of the time laughing and going, what the fuck is going on? Those were the things that I remember. And because again, to me, two men performing on stage in 1979, that would be like a kind of a sort of Oxbridge couple of men, sort of Fry and Laurie types, although I'm not sure they were doing stuff at the time. But that was very much all the kind of the sort of working men's clubs sort of guys who would just throw custard pies in each other's face and things. But this was like, they were like sort of being really horrible to each other. there was no kind of nice let up in there. It was like they were just nasty. And the other thing that I just remembered it, and I know it's not a kind of remembered thing that obviously has developed more because it was such a sort of trademark Rik thing. But they sort of looked at the audience, and they opened his eyes, and the audience laughed, and then he opened them a bit more, and they laughed even more. He just had that ability. His face just could go that much further to get them out. And I just remember that he would make, you were just always laughing in his company, really.
When Rik did sadly die in 2014, you wrote a really moving tribute to him on Chortle, Dave, and you mentioned seeing Death on the Toilet way back in '79, and you said it was a real epiphany for you watching that show, and then obviously becoming close to Rik as you did. When you described it as an epiphany, was it because the humour that Rik and Ade were putting out there was so different to anything you'd seen before then? Obviously, this is pre-Young Ones, It's an exciting time to imagine Rik and Ade bursting into the Fringe with their first play.
Yeah, it was just, it was way ahead of its time. And, as a stand-up, I've seen that happen a couple of times subsequently. And you see it and you just think, a similar thing happened, I remember, when Harry Hill started. And for the first year or so that Harry Hill was doing his set, he kind of, half the time he died, and the other half he sort of did okay. But the comics got him straight away, and so there was always just like a big huge laughs coming from the back of the room of like 3 or 4 people who were on the bill with him nearly 50 years ago. I think it was that the audience weren't all massively rolling about, but I was. I just thought, oh, I've never seen anything like this. And it was a kind of, subsequently, obviously, Bottom has kind of shown, but where it came from, which is sort of the kind of Samuel Beckett plays. And I had never heard of Samuel. Well, I heard of Samuel Beckett, but I thought, oh, he's some sort of pretentious theatre thing. And Rik said, oh, no, he's brilliant. He's brilliant. And the other influence was a man called Flann O'Brien. And that was somebody I did know and I had heard of. And Rik was a massive fan of Flann O'Brien, a book called The Third Policeman, which is a just a great novel, really. So they're very, very strong, kind of surreal Irish humour. But then Rik was just all the other reference points felt like the stuff that we'd grown up with, the popular culture that we all knew about. Specifically, the ethos of punk. I think the whole sense of what punk was kind of in that show, and it wasn't, they weren't swearing and anarchy, and and obviously the Rik character in the young ones is.
Was there a bit of violence in there then, Dave? Would you you said they were horrible to each other? Do you remember?
Yeah, I think
that
there
element?
was. I think there was. Yes. Again, this could be a misremembering, because I do remember quite soon after that seeing the Dangerous Brothers. I mean, not so, like a couple of years later, I remember the Dangerous Brothers, and so I can't vouch for. I mean, you'd probably have to ask Ade, and I don't know if he talks about this stuff much.
It sounds like this was the start of a kinship between yourself and Rik, the start of a friendship, and obviously this preceded, as Ange said, the Young Ones and a lot of the move into TV from Rik and a lot of the other alternative comics at the time. Were you were you friends with him through the process of the Young Ones being commissioned and all that sort of thing, as people were starting to get on the comic strip and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, and I mean, there was a very weird coincidence, was that I was a student at Bristol at the time. He was at Manchester, and that's how we knew each other. Was that his tutor at Manchester was a guy who actually was also worked at the Bristol drama department, and he had come up the year earlier with our show. He directed my one-man rock opera. He's called Martin White, and Rik was very, very much a fan of Martin. But I was at Bristol, and living in the flat above me was Lisa Mayer, and I knew Lisa pretty well, really. We kind of mixed in similar circles, and so there was this kind of weird situation where I knew Lisa before Rik did, but then so that in 1979 we kind of bonded, and it was all fantastic, oh wonderful, etc., etc. And then I didn't see them much after that for like a year, 2 years, and then the Young Ones happened, and it was like
Wow.
an explosion. And they came, and I was a journalist now in South Wales, and they came and toured, and they came to Cardiff with the Young Ones show, and I went backstage to meet and say hi and everything, and it was just all, oh yeah, oh come on, and Lisa was there, and it was just like I was one of the gang.
Yeah,
and I'm very much on the basis of that stroking of my own ego, me being there with these incredible TV stars who'd just done a massive rock and roll style gig, storming it, and I was like, and they said, "Oh, come to London, be a comedian, do all this stuff." Oh, okay, so I basically quit my job, moved to London. As luck would have it, because they were all so hugely successful, there was this comedy scene in London that was lots of venues and no performers. So
Wow.
I got lucky there, and that was around the time they were making the second series of the Young Ones. So I did see them a lot. I saw Rik and Lisa a lot over that second series period when I moved to London. And then again, when I was trying to start up a comedy magazine. This was before Viz happened, and Rik was helping me with that. So after sort of the mid to late 80s, and he was going off to America a lot more, and I was actually working as a stand-up 6 or 7 nights a week. So we sort of lost touch pretty much after that.
When you went to London to do stand-up, obviously Rik and Ade and other comics were performing at the comic strip and various other places. Did you ever perform there? Was that one of the places you went and did stand-up?
In 1982, I did the Comedy Store, actually, the old Comedy Store. Funny enough, I was talking to Don Ward on Sunday night. Was the 40th anniversary of the Comedy Store Players.
Wow. Okay.
But yeah, so there was this. It was like a strip club that was hosted comedy one night a week. Yeah, I tried it, and it was. I sort of did well enough to think, okay, I'm not bad at this. But then I also thought, this isn't like 1979 when, Rik, I felt like we were all in it together. I was me and Rik and Ade were doing their show, and there were other people. I felt part of that group. And then I came in 1982, and I just thought, and Ben Elton was comparing, and Keith Allen did a headline. I came up in 1981 or 82. It's before the success of the Young Ones, but I knew that, they were on the up, that whole gang. And in fact, Keith Allen had been as well. I'd known him through a Bristol surrealist theatre group that I was involved with as well, in a sort of weird way. So I could see they were all kind of heading that way, and I was being a journalist in South Wales, and I just thought, that's it. I had my chance, and that's it. No more comedy for me. I really thought at that point, that's it. I'm not going to have a comedy career. I'll be a journalist.
And it was seeing Rik then and Lisa and that brought you back to doing it.
Yeah, and it was ridiculous, really, because they were just being nice to me. They knew me, and so it was like, oh yeah, Dave, yeah, good old Dave, whatever. Whereas I was thinking, oh my gosh, these people who are my friends, they're being friendly to me, and they are huge stars of TV, and so I'm going to quit. I'm going to come to London and get a TV show as well, and get this and that. And I kind of, I was lucky because I learned in the first sort of 3 weeks when I arrived in London, I learned, okay, this isn't how it works. But I also learned, but you can go and you can do a tryout spot at a club, and they'll book you, and you'll get 80 quid, 50 quid on the door, which was, fantastic. I'd do 3 gigs. I could sign on because you only had to do 11 hours or less work. I was doing like 3 20-minute sets and getting like 150 quid a week, getting my housing paid, get my dole. It was just so, although, the idea of being on their coattails fell away very, very quickly, I was still able to just, really kind of do well enough, really.
But you were I know you mentioned that Rik supported you even in those early years, like trying to introduce you to people that he thought might be helpful and things like that, which is
Was that period sort of your comedy apprenticeships or your comedy training? Was that where you kind of got to grips with comedy writing and really becoming good at it, do you think?
Yeah, we were so lucky. My generation, who I would say I would include, so people like, well, Paul Merton was sort of just before me, I would say, but then you have people like kind of Joe Brown, Mark Thomas, Kevin Day, our kind of era. We were okay, but we weren't that great, and there wasn't anything much to go on. But we were good enough that we could get away with a 20-minute set, and we had 2 years of performing 3 nights a week, and so inevitably we did get a lot better. So by the time the circuit got much bigger, which began in sort of the summer of 1985 when the Comedy Store reopened, and that was a big turning point, really. And by then, me and Mark and Jeremy Hardy and Joe Brand, those people, we were already, we were good enough at that point. We could do midnight shows, we could do 2 shows a night there, we could, so yes, but that was very much, that stand-up was very much sort of doing that without anyone, under the radar, really.
Yeah.
But yes,
and I mean, it's like the comedy landscape has changed so much, hasn't it? And you've ridden the waves of it, changing over the years. And it's amazing, Dave, that you do pass on your wisdom to people who are coming up through it now. But we'd be remiss if we didn't ask you a little bit about Bottom. I know you've said that you're not necessarily that sort of up on Bottom, but you must have watched it and you're aware of it. Like, we just wanted to get your feelings on what kind of stands out for you in Bottom and Rik and Ade's characters, Richie and Eddie.
I mean, if I could just mention one other character, I don't know if you've talked about this character much, but the character Mitch, has that ring any bells for you?
Mitch, do you tell us, is that predating Kevin Turvey?
It's very much so.
Yeah.
Victoria Wood behind me, the Victoria Wood show,
yes, of
early
course.
1980s, 79, 80. And Rik was doing this character.
Yeah, he's got the feminist.
Yes,
it's the
that's the
right
one.
on feminist.
The
isn't it?
right on feminist who's basically
Yeah.
using his right onness to sort of get on with the chicks.
Yeah.
A really, really kind of quite advanced comedic. I mean, it was way ahead of its time. What's really interesting about that character is you watch there's 2 or 3 sketches on Victoria Wood, and they're obviously recorded live. There's hardly any laughter. Nobody gets it. But what is amazing about that is how he just keeps going and he just keeps playing it. And I think that's, for me, one of the things that I remember about Bottom. Again, I've not watched a huge amount of it, but what I always liked watching Rik doing audience shows, I mean, not so much the young ones, because that was much more of a team thing, and it wasn't really so much his thing.
Yeah.
Obviously, he was the star of it, but everybody else, there were so many star turns in it that he wasn't as big a star in it as he was in Bottom. But it's the way that he could just do all that stuff and not necessarily be getting laughs, but he's I'm just going to keep going. I'll get a laugh eventually, And I think that's number one of the overriding things that I love about that show.
We did a podcast recently where we talked about various characters that Rik had played, and that was something we talked about when he was doing the Kevin Turvey sitting on the chair monologues.
Yeah.
And that when it first started, and you could tell that when he was doing that, literally when he was doing the first one, that the audience couldn't quite tell whether is this real or is this person actually like this or is this a character. And there wasn't the laughs in the first one that they got subsequently, and because people were sort of trying to suss it out. And we discussed this, and we said with many other actors, they might start to, the voice might start to crack, or they might start to rush it maybe or something. Yeah. But with Rik, there was never any of that. There was just self-assuredness of, no, I know what I'm doing. I'm the character. I'm in control. And he just kept at it.
Or they might ham it. They might try and just make it a bit bigger. And that was the other thing. And I mean, Richie in the Bottom, and they're big. They are already very big characters, so that sort of doesn't matter quite as much. There was something, and thing about Steptoe, I suppose. Like when I watched Steptoe, I was a kid, and it was just you dirty old man, and that was what we found funny. But then they showed it again, and I was like 17 or 18 years old, and Steptoe was on again, and I just watched and thought, this is so bleak. I mean, it's really funny. It's really funny, but just the set and Rik just looked like a homeless man, And
we've definitely drawn comparisons between Galton and Simpson's writing and Rik and Ade. There was a huge influence, as well as obviously Beckett. I think that we've talked about the bleakness and the nihilism that lies at the heart of Bottom, as well as the exaggerated over the top. It's a perfect mixture of extreme violence and extreme depression at times, and you can't help but laugh.
I don't know also if you've talked about, but this was again something that I remember from when we met, apart from the Flann O'Brien link, which we were really into. Rik was just totally obsessed with Roadrunner. Again, I don't know if you've talked about that at all, but
we've touched upon Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner as an influence. It's undeniable, isn't it? It's there. Yeah. But what do you? I mean, did Rik used to talk about that with you, Dave?
Well, the show was called their first group was called 20th Century Coyote, which was obviously like 20th Century Fox and the Coyote. Yeah, the whole thing about Roadrunner, it was he just found that he just wanted to kind of come back to this idea that you could just have this violence all the time, I mean, ideally, he just wanted hard to believe probably, but he was kind of holding back on the violence. He just loved that violence, and I think we all did. We all grew up with that similar stuff. And the Tom and Jerry as well. I mean, we were just watching violence the whole time, but there was something and I remember when The Simpsons came out and they brought on this, you know, they had this sort of the Itchy and Scratchy show, and it was like, haha, cartoons are all about violence, and this, but Itchy and Scratchy, of course, were actual, really horrible violence. And I think the thing I liked about what I liked about Death on the Toilet and The Dangerous Brothers and Talking Bottom and Bottom rather was this kind of comedy violence. And it's interesting because in the last year or so I've become completely obsessed with Shakespeare. I've been reading a lot of Shakespeare. I've been going to see a lot of plays, and there's a lot of it in Shakespeare. There is a lot of kind of funny violence. There's a lot of humor to the violence in Shakespeare, and I think there is something which I really want to explore, and I'm a long way from being able to talk about it without sounding like a complete bullshitter at this point. But there is this, well, I went to see this play Titus Andronicus, which is brutal and really nasty, and it's all about revenge, but it's kind of, and the stuff that's in there, you know, like he chops his own hand off on stage, you know, it's a stage direction, chops his hand off, and there are times when the audience is laughing, you know, and you can't, it's sort of like you can't not laugh, and I think that's something that, you know, I wish that Rik was still around, and I wish that, you know, now I wouldn't have been known to ask this question, but I would love to say, you know, what is it about? I'm sure scientists or neuropsychologists will know, you know, where is the humor? Where is violence and humor? Why is it funny?
Maybe, I think it lies somewhere surely between the fact that it's a shock. So obviously shock and surprise makes you laugh, but also it's very relatable if you've also got the attitude behind, you know, when Jerry wins, you're with him, aren't you? Or you know, like there's that sort of like you like to see someone fall. And it's you know, it's that Schadenfreude feeling, isn't it? If you're not you're not the person who's having it. But yeah, it's a fascinating, endlessly fascinating topic, and I'd love to hear more about the Shakespeare side of things.
I think I was going to mention as well that I think Dennis Norden had the best definition of what is a joke. He says every joke is a momentary removal of sympathy, which is really brilliant, isn't it? It just describes everything, and I think that's the thing about comedy violence, is that when you get hit over the head with a frying pan, you know, and it's not comedy, and you know, you go to A&E and you might get a serious head injury or something. Whereas, you know,
that is really, I mean, that really does sum up, I think, where people do struggle now with the raging debate of, you know, has being woke killed comedy? Now, being woke is obviously about being very understanding and caring and many really great traits, but that you have to pause your sympathy for certain jokes to really land and work, don't you? And that's, if you've got a wicked sense of humor, that is something that I think it's changing, it's evolving, and it doesn't mean you can't be funny without it, but that is a fascinating psychological point, isn't it? That, you know, if you put your sympathy on hold for a moment, then you're allowed to laugh.
Yeah, dare I say, in the current climate, I think there are, if Rik and Ade had still been doing things now, a lot of people would have said, "Oh, you can't do that. You can't do that." And I think the idea that woke is it's a new thing or whatever. It's again, sorry to come back to Shakespeare, but you know, Shakespeare had to really be careful how he wrote about stuff, because you know, a lot of people, a lot of plays got banned around the time, and Ben Jonson play. There's a Ben Jonson play called The Isle of Dogs, which apparently was brilliant, but there aren't any copies of it. Every copy had to be burned under the Lord Chancellor's instructions, because it was basically taking the piss out of the Queen. So, you know, satire
was censored.
Yeah, it's always been that way. But to bring it back to Rik, I mean, he definitely had that, you know, that kind of, if you think about the sort of the more kind of traditional physical comedy people, say, you know, like Rowan Atkinson or Benny Hill, the Marx Brothers, you know, I think, you know, Rik had all those skills, but then he just brought this very much this kind of 70s, 80s culture to it. The whole the punk aspect to it, and I think that's what made him unique. Even when it didn't work, it was compelling to watch.
Do you ever wonder what he might be doing now if he was still with us?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a little bit weird because, you know, after his accident, and this is not me because I didn't really see him much, even really after the 80s, not much at all, but I did know people who knew him, and they did, a lot of people said that, you know, there was a lot of sort of problems and bits, sort of a little bit of brain damage and things when after the quad bike accident. And I think, from what I've heard, I'm aware of a sort of relative decline in certain aspects of what he was doing. That was obviously quite sad, and you know, he was. There's another thing as well, which I've noticed, I think, and it's something that I've noticed with various people, that when somebody is really, really successful when they're very young in comedy, it's very hard for them to kind of carry on to really kind of to sort of keep things at that level. And people that I've known from stand-up world who were sort of good from day one, like Jeremy Hardy, Sean Hughes, you know, they sort of exploded onto the scene and they were really, really successful, but they didn't have, they never had that sort of pullback, you know, like they never got into, like, the first time that they had a bad gig or something, it was just like they didn't learn anything from it, and so it sort of, they were already at the peak, and it was like a very sort of steady sort of decline from there. But I mean, there were other people like Joe Brand and Lee Evans. They were also really, really good from day one. But then they were on Saturday Live or something, and they used up all their material on 4. You know, they each did 4 slots on TV, and that was 20 minutes. That was all their material was gone. And they went back, Lee and Joe stopped. They went right back to the beginning. They just did all the really tiny gigs, and they just built and built and built. So when Lee Evans and Joe Brand were successful the second time around, they were ready for it, and they carried on. But I think with Rik, he was so good right from the get-go, and pretty quickly, you know, he was a star. And it's hard, I think, in that situation, really hard to keep at that level.
Yeah, well, I mean, he literally burnt so bright, didn't he? You know, like there was no real competing with Rik. It is what a few people have said. You know, like I think Michael Plain has said when he did improv with Rik, you know, he almost was annoyed with him because it was just impossible to compete. And you know, Ade was exactly what Rik needed in that, you know, sort of Laurel and Hardy-esque, you know, double act that was unique to them. And I suppose, it must have been tough on the other side of Rik's accident, seeing things just have to move on. We've talked about it a lot, haven't we, Paul, with Matt as well on the podcast, and you know, we're grateful for everything they did with Bottom, and we're grateful Rik got to do Man Down, really, really, you know, great things in his later years, but you know, we just wish there was more, obviously, as fans, but hey, not to be. Well, now that we've brought the mood down, now let's talk about the future and the excitement of what's going up next. So, Dave, tell us about your next novel, your third in the trilogy for Barry Goldman.
Okay, well, I'll start with the first one just because that is the one that is sort of most about Rik, really. So this kind of covers that period from, and it's heavily fictionalized, by the way. So there's very little in it that people would recognize, but people who knew Rik then might recognize that it's a bit like him. But mostly it's, you know, it's a fictionalized version of from about the mid-70s through till 1979. But the 3 books are kind of the story of alternative comedy, how it happened, told through my eyes, through this sort of vaguely autobiographical character, Barry Goldman. So that's the first one that covers that period up to 79. Then the second one is called Barry Goldman: The Wilderness Years, which is this one. So, and then that's kind of after 79, and that's more about me and my journalism career. But there is still quite a lot of the Rik, the Rik that I was talking about earlier, who was becoming massively successful while I was sitting in South Wales being a journalist. But then the third book is now up to, it's set in 1987, and that's kind of a period where I was quite successful. And so it's the end of it's called Barry Pulls It Off. It's the last in the series, and it's the end of it's the books between them kind of are a little bit about the history of alternative comedy from 1977 to 1987.
The first two are out now, and when's the third one out then?
It's probably now actually going to be March 2026. So
March 2026. But is it available to pre-order now? If people go to Amazon now, can they pre-order?
I think it will be. Yes, it should be on pre-order. Barry Pulls It Off by Dave Cohen, and the other two will be out. I've just rejigged them a bit, and so they'll be out in mid-November. The pre-order for Barry Pulls It Off will hopefully be just before Christmas. That would be good.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, we look I mean, I really want to read them, Dave. I'm gonna now.
Good. Well, they're available from all good computers. So
I will be getting my copies, reading them, and I'll be trying to work out what events are entirely accurate and what events have been fictionalized, and trying to see if I can work out who's who in the alternative comedy world in the characters.
There's a lot of mashed up different sort of elements of the different incidents conjoined, nicely. But yeah, the porn cinema is definitely that was real, but it's a different. I put it in a different place. Yeah.
Porn cinema is that it's not the Banshee Labyrinth, is it, in Edinburgh?
It was called La Scala, I think, and it was in Nicholson Street. It's not been there since the mid-80s, I think. So
right. Okay.
Quite a while ago. The fictional character's first show is called Meep Meep, so that's a sort of made up thing. But yeah,
well, that's the Roadrunner, isn't it?
It is indeed. Yes,
Meep.
So it's all there.
Superb. Anyway, yeah, we look forward to getting those, Dave, and I'm really glad that you've been able to get the third novel out. And is there going to be more novels from you then, or is it going to be mainly comedy instruction manuals still?
Well, I don't know. I'll say the Shakespeare obsession is going to be. There's a new podcast that I'm doing called the Shakespeare Mindset. So that's all about how to live your life using Shakespeare as your guide.
Well, if there's one thing we found doing a podcast, it's that it's a good way to compile research material for you to then down the line turn it into a book, because that's what we did. So
absolutely. Yeah.
We've written one book, done one podcast. You've done loads, Dave. So you're an inspiration. Thank you, and thanks for taking the time to talk to us today. I mean, I'm sure we could have touched upon so many more memories that you have with Rik, but we don't want to pry too much into your sort of drinking buddy kind of like days and everything. But we'd love to hear more. If you're willing to share about your happy times with Rik in the early days, because it's fascinating to us. We weren't able to be around, let alone part of the gang.
Well, it was I feel very lucky to have been around at that time and to have seen that and had a very been a very, very small, been a footnote really in that whole time, really, which is a good thing to have been then. Read the novels and then you'll have some more questions, I'm sure, because you'll recognize things and moments. I think possibly you might get some more questions out of that.
Absolutely. Well, we'll hold you to that, Dave. Thank you so much for your time talking bottom. Just for the listener, we'll say if you want to follow us, you can find us at Talking Bottom. If anyone wants to find you, Dave, where can they find you on socials?
I've given up on social media, I've decided. So that's a brave thing to do when you're trying to launch a book and a podcast. So, but at the moment, I've got a new website under construction. But at the moment, davecohen.org.uk is where you can find me.
Excellent, lovely stuff. Well, we'll
thank you.
Make sure that everyone's following you, Dave. And
thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone. We also have our book out as well. If you haven't been aware of the title of that is Talking Bottom, A Guide to the Cult Sitcom. It's out in all good bookshops. It should be out right now from when we put this out. It's 6th of November. It's back on sale. Lovely stuff. Anything else to add, Paul?
No, just to say thank you very much, Dave. It's been a pleasure. I know that our listeners will love to have heard the stories and the insight that you shared with us, and I'm sure a lot of them are going to be scurrying out now to acquire several new books for their bookshelves.
Thank you very much. Thank you
you
for having me.